Good afternoon, everyone. Okay. The sound check. If you can hear me clearly, kindly use the comment, the chat box to give a clear, yeah, kindly say hi via the comment chat box. Okay. If you can hear me, kindly say hi using the comment chat box. Oh, okay, perfect. Okay. All right, thank you so much. Today, we have a fireside chat on open source. Today, I have one of the most intelligent guy in the ecosystem right now, in person of Ayodeji Ogundare, and I'm privileged to learn from him this afternoon. And I hope everyone on this platform will rightly learn one or two things from this conversation. So yeah, this is our second webinar this month, this year. So yeah, it's all about open source. We have an amazing guy that will break the session down into pieces. So it will be a fireside chat about his experience with open source and how open source can simply lead to a numerous opportunity. So thank you for joining us today, Chidi. Thank you for joining us, Tosin. Aya, are you available to introduce yourself?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Okay. Yeah, can I go on?
Sure. Yeah, the floor is yours. I want you to introduce yourself, tell us about you and how you, yeah, just tell us a brief about you.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Ayodeji. Yeah, I'm a community manager, and I'm also an open source advocate. The current Polygon advocate, and yeah, so basically, I'm just an advocate for open source, and with every chance I have, every opportunity I have, I like to advocate for open source and also open source community. It's an honor being here on this platform, and thank you for the invite.
Yeah, it's good. It's all good. Ayo, thank you so much. I see some trend recently. You've been pushing for and advocating for open source lately. And I see that you are currently working together with prominent community advocates who literally take open source as a key thing towards ensuring success with job searching. So particularly this session will rally about your own personal experience about how you get started. So the first question I will be having for you for today, in case I don't know, did you have a slide presentation on?
Okay, no, actually, I prepare a slide. That's what
Okay, fine. Yeah, the session does not require any slide with just a deep conversation between you and I. So we just want to know, how did you how did you get started with open source? Yeah, that would be my first question. Or what did you understand? What's open source?
Okay. So basically, if I were to define open source, the way that to be understandable by most people, I would say open source. Okay, let me just complete. Open source software is the software that the code base is available for everyone to change, to modify, to improve. So we have so many open source software out there, and actually, if you take statistics, the best of the best of softwares out there are actually open source. So yeah, so I started open source way back, and not really code per se. I started open source contributing to open source community because large part of my contribution to open source is actually via community, just little code. So started open source where back then where I was in school. Start contributing to open source community, build communities around open source software, advocate for people to also contribute like I'm doing. So it's been actually a long ride ever since. I think it was this year I actually said, okay, yeah, I'm going to sort of focus more on that aspect because before now it's been okay, open source and something, but this year I decided, okay, yeah, it's going to be just for open source, and I'm going to see how I could get more people involved in open source.
All right, thank you, Ayodeji, for that insightful intro on open source. Yeah, another thing that I noticed from your communication right now, does open source literally restricted to coding or anything technical? How would you answer that?
Okay, yes. Okay, actually, for my intro, I said that most of my contribution actually was community, and code is just one of the many ways you can contribute to open source. There are several other ways you can contribute to open source. For instance, if you don't code, or probably you feel you are not there yet to contribute to the code base, you can actually contribute in several ways. These days, even designers contribute to open source. Um, you can contribute to open source. Maybe first, you can contribute to the documentation. You go to the repository. That's where the code base is stored in GitHub or Bitbucket or GitLab or any other um, online repository. You go there, you check for the documentation. You try to see if there are things you can improve. I think my last contribution to open source that has to do with even me going to GitHub or sending a pull request was actually inserting um, a comma and working on a sentence. So that was my last contribution. So open source contribution um, can be as easy as correcting a sentence in a documentation, or adding even some clear demarcation parentheses. So you can contribute to the documentation, you can contribute to the code base, you can contribute design. So in an open source project, definitely we need design, especially now that design is very important in many software development. So if, for instance, any open source project is starting, definitely they will need a designer. So your contribution may be in the aspect of design, creating design. Then also another aspect you can contribute to open source is also community. Yeah, building communities around open source. As we know, the importance of community around products is can never be overemphasized, because community is just the best way to increase the user base of a product. So you can contribute to that open source project by building the community. So yeah, so that there are several ways to contribute to open source, not just technically. I think if I were to rate the percentage of how you can contribute to open source, contributing technically or code wise is just let's say 10%. The rest are not even relating to code.
So it means everybody can literally contribute to open source projects without even knowing how to code.
Yes, sure. Open source is for everyone, and anyone can contribute to open source, and even to some
All
aspects, you can
right.
even
Yeah.
contribute to open source by telling them what needs to be done. Just by saying it. You can maybe while using the product, you discovered that there's a bug or something happened, whether the app crashed or something. Reporting that situation, reporting what's happened and what needs to be fixed, creating an issue on the repo is actually another way of contributing to open source. So you don't have to go into the technical details. So everybody can contribute to open source.
Wow, that's so exciting to hear. I think almost everybody is willing to do that. And okay, also, basically, you've been talking about open source. The first thing you talk about was how open source can be of help in terms of increasing your knowledge. And at the same time, you talk about how everybody can, literally do some things. Either you are technical or you're not a technical person, and how best it can build up a community. Did you really think that open source in Nigeria or the community are currently accepting the verge of open source? Did you think it's helping situation with some of the Nigerian projects out there? Or did you think there's not even any project that is willing to be open source, or there is no open source out there? What can you say about that?
Yes, I think if probably maybe some few years back, I would say maybe no much contribution. I think Sam Sigodi actually shared one of the space. I hosted him. It was when he went to an open source conference, and open source contributors from Africa was very, very low. The number of people from Africa was low, but currently the figures has changed. That has changed now. We have so many open source, so many open source projects out there that are Nigerian related. So many of them that actually the creators are Nigerians. So and what's actually increased the participation of open source in Nigeria is actually communities like Open Source Africa, Open Source Community Africa. Yeah, so and that's one of the importance of community. It drives awareness. And it drives more participation in open source. So I would say right now there are a lot of open source projects that originated from Nigeria and are ready to receive open source collaboration. I think there's a link that has I don't know. There's a link that has um, I think a repo of all open source projects from Nigerians. I think there's a link like that. So if I'm able to get it before the end of the talk, I'll provide it. So, but there are so many projects out there that are open source.
All right, Mr. Haya, thank you so much for that elaborate answer on some of the projects that are currently based on open source in Nigeria. what can you say about the major aim of open source? Is it assisting people to get job, or did you have any testimony you can share of ways that open source project can literally be your ticket for getting job?
Okay, yeah. Actually, open source is very beneficial in so many aspects. A lot of testimonies actually. I myself have, you know, had same experience. So before I share other people's testimony, I will actually share mine. My experience with open source. Open source for being I mentioned before that I was contributing to community, and the the job I'm currently on now was actually made possible with via my contribution to open source. So I was, before I got the job, I was contributing to open source. I actually I was a GDG lead. I was um I was involved with WordPress community. I was involved with so many community. So uh, when I when I got called for the job, I didn't have to even do much interview, because somebody from the community actually recommended me, and I too, and the person also interviewing me already knows me and already knows my work. So I was hired immediately to that position because of my experience. So open source is like your public CV that everybody actually is saying. Um, your contribution to the code base, your contribution to the community, your contribution to the documentation, all these are your public CV. So it helps you cut down the level of interview you go through, because if you're an open source contributor, your work is out there. The interviewer doesn't need to do much in terms of ascertaining what you're capable of, because of everything you're doing is out there and is visible. So open source to career is very, very important. I would advise anybody, especially in tech, anybody, please take open source seriously. And I always say that open source is not actually by force, but is recommended. So if you're a software engineer, if you're a community manager, if you're UI UX designer, if whatever aspect, whatever field you are in this tech space, make sure you take open source seriously, because it helps. It helps a lot in boosting your career. I used to see open source as a catalyst to career growth, because it speeds, or probably you're supposed to take during my space in my space event. So many people have different stories of how open source have changed their life literally, and it's still changing their life. From being involved with open source, they met people they thought probably they would not met in like 10 years to come. So that's open source. Open source shortens that 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 path you're supposed to take. So normally, if you're supposed to take 10 years to reach a certain level, open source can help you shorten it to maybe like 3-5 years, and you'll be at the right point where you want to be. So open source is very important to career.
Wow. I think, yeah, that's excellent, if I may say, considering the fact that some people are currently listening to us, and I do know that they really enjoy that insightful tips you gave about uh, open source. Yeah, Favor Daniel, you raise up your hands. Yeah,
Hello, good afternoon. Am I
yeah, good
audible?
afternoon. Yeah, very audible.
Okay, so I have a question based on what you said. It's like it's good for everyone to contribute to open source, which is true, yes. But the ones we are more familiar with are like software developers contributing to open source through GitHub. Now, for people who are designers, technical writers, like product managers, different fields that don't have to do with code, how do you think we can contribute to open source? Because most of us want to, but we don't really know how to. Please help with that.
I didn't get your question. I don't know if it's just me.
Yeah, Favor.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm struggling to hear you due to audio something. Yeah, but we can hear you clearly now. Yeah, ask your question again. I think, yeah, Favor is trying to ask.
Is it better now?
Yeah, it's better now. Go on.
Okay, so I was asking because he said something about everybody contributing to open source that is very good, which we all agree. But what I'm saying is the majority of open source contributions that we've heard of are mostly from software developers. Now, how would you advise, or what kind of measures do you think that designers, technical writers, product managers, or even project people in different fields that don't have to do with code, how do you think they can contribute to open source? That's my question.
Okay, so there are several ways you can actually get projects to contribute to. But before that, I think you should go through the open source guide, that opensource.guide. I'm going to send the link in the chat. So if you can go through this link I just sent, it gives you a kind of background of open source generally. There are different modules there, so you can take up each of the modules, and by the time you're done, you will understand the concept. I think it has some part of how to contribute to open source. It has another part of starting an open source project. Then it has another important part which would answer your question about finding users. Okay, finding users, then also building welcoming communities. So there are several modules there, and also it teaches you how to use open source and get paid. So just go through that guide. It's going to answer most of your questions regarding what you just asked. Now you're going to have received. Once you are able to go through the modules and contained in the guide, I believe you'll get the answers you're looking for. So as a designer, just recently we are actually planning on launching on an open source project. So basically, you need to be a part of the community. That's one thing. For instance, Open Source Community Africa is currently will be taking place March, and they called for volunteers. So volunteers are coming in different aspects, in terms of coding, in terms of just the registration, in terms of ushering, in terms of video graphics, in terms of the graphics part. So those are, if you're able to do that, you're also contributing to open source, because you're actually contributing to an open source project. You're contributing to an open source course. So any course around open source that you've helped to improve is actually a contribution to open source. So look out for projects. And one other way you can contribute as a designer is that I'm just using designer because designers are more like in that space of asking such question. For instance, you can go to an open source project, you can go to the website, you look at the website and just look at things you can improve in the design. So many open source projects, because maybe it's not a proprietary software, it's not a proprietary product. So they are not able to get funds to get a good designer. So as a designer, you can go there, look at the website, look at what you can improve, and see how, for instance, the UI UX designer can go through the website, then do a case study to now redesign that website. So once you're able to redesign the website, you can contribute that design to that project, so that those in charge of now the engineering part can convert the design to your new design once it's fully approved. So by that way, you've contributed to open source even without writing code. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, you did. Thank you.
So, yeah, I think that clarifies your thought, Favor, isn't it?
Yes, yes, yes.
All right. So I'm about to ask the next questions before you ask that question about how possible for you to get in, um, how best you can go with open source. So the next questions I'm about to put through to Ayodeji is, yeah, basically every new contributors wants to see themselves at the forefront page of maybe any particular project they are contributing. So my question is this: does transparency and collaborations in terms of inclusion, does it takes place when you are trying to contribute to a project as a beginner?
Yes, actually, it actually depends on the setup of the project. Um, there are open source project as actually put up by human beings. So you definitely see different types of open source projects. So there are some open source projects that are created to be inclusive. That gives everybody chance to contribute, that helps people to know how to contribute. If you go to some open source projects, just the contribution.md alone would discourage you, because maybe it's not probably formatted, or maybe you don't even maybe you don't even understand. You're not I don't know how to put it, but you don't know how to even navigate through the project. So as a beginner, I think you should look for such projects that are complete in that regard to contribute to, because that will give you a chance of actually showcasing yourself. And another thing, it might not be directly related, but also is that there are some open source projects that the maintenance are not that available. They will just open, it might just, okay, for example, there was a project I contributed to, there was a Python project I contributed to. I contributed to the project, and yeah, I improved the code, but I think even up to today, the maintainer has not checked the pull request, talk less of even merging it to the code base. So there are projects like that. So what you should do is, first, for you not to make your work go to waste, the first thing you should do is check the project, check the last time the last time a PR was merged. That is the last time a change was added, was activated, or was added to the main code base. Check the last time it was done. If you're seeing like 1 year ago, 2 years ago, please run from that project, because actually your effort is going to be wasted. So look for projects that has active maintenance, that can, because if your PR is actually not merged, you've not done any contribution actually, because your PR needs to be merged to the code base. Then it's now seen that it actually works. So that's when your contribution is complete. So to further buttress on inclusiveness, always look for projects with good documentation, with good write-up, with good transparency. There are some projects that you contribute to that the maintainer will say is not an open source contribution, but the maintainer would go from the backyard to go and add that your contribution through his own account and rendering your own contribution, though it should be helpful, but now useless because the person has actually added your own contribution without giving you the what I say the right to that contribution. So that's how you can help yourself. Go for projects that are very, very open, that are very transparent, that has a lot more description on how the done and everything you need to know. And also, as I mentioned again, check the frequency of pull request merge, check how active the maintenance are.
Yeah, thank you so much, Hayo, for that insightful comment. It give more clarification on the transparency, collaboration, and inclusion aspect. So yeah, which brings me back to the last questions. Sometimes, yeah, you already said it's a key thing for us to get a job using open source. But sometimes everybody has that phobia of why would I put my project public when I can put it private or monetize it or try to put some certain price tag, or how will I just contribute to another person's project without thinking of my kind of intellectual property or maybe privacy or something. Is there any way that open source cater for that kind of people who are in that category of mindset? Like, how will I put my code out there when I can easily monetize it? Can you differentiate between that kind of mindset of the mindset of this project is open and I want other people to contribute for the betterment of the community?
Okay, so I would say that open source projects out there are actually one of the best in what they do. For instance, when you talk about operating system, just when you talk about operating system, Linux is one of the most used operating system in development development sector. You see companies like Google, Apple, they use most of their core development use Linux server. And so that tells you that if you make your project open source, it actually would improve your project. And Linux actually was created years ago. And from Linux, a lot of other projects, came up. A lot of other projects sprung up. If you're able to, right now, we cannot even count the number of version of Linux out there because a lot of people have carried it, improved it to their own version. There are some version of Linux that is focused on cybersecurity, Red Hat. There are some version of Linux that is focused on utility. There's some version of Linux that is focused on servers. So that is what open source can do. So now just imagine, for instance, also I'm going back to now Android. The Android system was created from Linux. So just imagine if Linux was not open source, probably would not have something like Android. You're able to enjoy a cheap phone. You're able to enjoy a cheap Android phone. Why? Because Android is open source. That's because everybody anybody, any organization can pick up Android software and build their own product around it. So that's the beauty of open source. It creates such opportunity. If Android was not open source, it wouldn't have been this popular. So now talk about video player. I'm sure most of you on your system, like right now on your laptop, you basically would have VLC. There's a player called VLC. Every new system, that's what most people download VLC first, and is regarded as one of the best video player, that one of the best video player out there. So imagine it was not open source. I don't think would have ever achieved that feat. So there are several open source. Just check out Mozilla. Mozilla is one of the best out there. In fact, most software developers don't use any other browser than Mozilla. It's one of the best software best browsers out there. Why? Because it's open source. Open source. So putting your a project as open source is not actually a disadvantage. Rather, it's a very huge advantage, because you're able to have a large community around it. You're able to have it improved in the ways that you cannot even imagine. These current softwares right now, this current open source software is the one I've mentioned, Linux, the VLC. Their creators I'm sure their creators never even imagined that they would be this this at this level, because that's what open source does. Everybody can bring an idea to improve it. And at the end of the day, we are all talking about Linus Torvald. Everybody's talking about him right now, still talking about him because of that simple decision he made to make his operating system open source. So open source, putting your project open source is never a disadvantage. It's always going to be an advantage. And definitely on the long run, it's going to make you live comfortable. It's going to make you live comfortable. So always think about open source when creating projects. It's not every project that can be open source, but most projects should be open source.
All right, Tayo, thank you so much for that insightful comment. I believe each and everybody gets one or two things from that beautiful explanation. So yeah, I would like to add before I finally wrapped up, Ayo, what advice would you give to beginners that are willing to be a contributor of open source?
Yes, so if you're a beginner contributor, just go through the link I sent, open source guide. It's going to help you get started on the best ways to contribute to open source. Then also, if you're a beginner here, I've hosted about, I think, 3 episodes of open source contribution right from the scratch. Yes, you can check my profile, my Twitter handle, my Twitter page, Ayodeji Dev. Just check. There's so many. Once you check this, my first pinned tweet is about open source. You can check it out. Then from there you can navigate through the first episode, second episode, third episode. So I try as much as possible to bring in people to explain all what I just said here. It's even nothing compared to all we gain in those Twitter space recordings. So we get to learn about how to get started. So the best way is to start off with that open source guide, then join a community. Yeah, so join a community. Open source community Africa is all over Nigeria, is all over Africa. So you can pick up on find the closest community to you and join. So from there, you start getting information on how to contribute. There are so many open source projects out there, but because of if you can only get those information through the community, from the community you get to know about those projects and how you can contribute. So if you're a newbie, just find a community, join the community, and yeah, go through the open source guide, and I'm sure you'll be able to get started easily.
Thank you, Alia, for your time. I am so glad to have you. I myself are learning a lot about this ask because my belief is always, oh, if you are not a coding guy, if you are not a tech guy, you can't contribute to open source. And what if I just put my project out there? What would be the advantage for me? And things like that. So I believe I have a clear clarification on all my curiosity. Thank you so much, Ayo. So yeah, do we have any contribution from the audience? Like, yeah, because this is a fireside chat, it will be shared on our YouTube platform for a large audience to watch. So yeah, did you have any contribution, Tosin? How about Favor?
I don't. I'm very good.
All right. Odin, Daniel, thanks for joining us. Do you have any contribution? And Iola?
Oh, no contributions. No contribution.
Yeah, no contribution. No contribution.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. It has been a wonderful moment. I hope you will join us in our next webinar. Thank you. Have a wonderful day. Bye. Thank you, Ayo, once again for your time.
Thank you, Ingressive. Thank you very much.